Welcome to Overlay Server adding alerts, adding animations, I'll call it, I think. Today we're going to take the previous code and we're going to add in an animation. Now this animation's not going to be anything spectacular, it's not going to be that difficult. It's going to be a fairly, not a completely basic animation, but it's going to be a reasonable animation. I will show you the animation in a second. And we're going to be using the code we had previously. So if you haven't seen the previous code, this is I highly suggest going and watching the last couple of videos. We will be using that and adding it in, hard coding the alerting. Now in a future video, if I see an interest in it, I will do a series on, or a couple of videos on how to dynamically load the overlays, which is a better way of doing it using jQuery. But for now, this is mainly to show you how you can take a CSS HTML overlay and use it for your alerts. So the way we've plugged it in is we've just hard coded it, like I say here. Now this will probably make more sense if I show you the overlay. So let me pop up the overlay. It's a simple box. It's going to pop up. It's going to expand out widthwise for the header, then the message at the bottom and the icon animated GIF is going to scroll down and expand down. It will come out at an angle, lay flat on screen, go back, and then so if I just play that for a second, anybody that knows World of Warcraft will know that sound. So you can see it says new follower testing with an animated. I've just used the bit icon, and I'll take that away. So that's what we're going to be doing, is just adding that in. When I first started, I used this for all of my alerts. I just had different colours and different icons depending whether there's a raid, a host and stuff. So you can actually do a whole sort of overlay with this. As I mentioned in the last one, if you only want to do your own custom subscribe alerts, you could use this and also have a second browser source pointed to your, say, Streamlabs.com overlay, and in that overlay just deselect the subscriber, follower, whatever your custom one is doing. So you can build these up over time. Like you can do one alert yourself and leave the rest still handled by OBS. Streamlabs. Too many names to remember. Anyway, so let's quickly get through this. So this is, like I say, this is an expansion of the previous file. There's two other files to this, plus the assets. So the only thing we've changed in this, the main Twitch overlay file, is first of all we replaced the previous div, which was just div ID, I think it was called follower alert or something like that, with this block of code here. What this is actually doing, the first thing it does is it loads up the code for the follower, which we'll come to in a second. That's follower.js. Inside that file we have the function we call when we want to trigger the alert. We also have a style sheet loaded, currently just called style. You'd probably want to change this to be follower style or something like that, so if you want different styles for your different alerts. We have a new outer div here, which this is more for when we come to, it would be more for when we come to auto load this dynamically at runtime. So what we would do in the next one is I'd use jQuery to load this code in rather than have it statically declared, but like I said, we're trying to keep it simple. So what does our overlay consist of? We've got an outer container, which is the overall box that everything is within from the alert code. Inside that we have a header, which is just a simple strip across the top of the box with the new follower. We have an image which goes on below that header on the left. It's this side for you, isn't it? Which is the icon, the bit icon turning, and then we have the context, which is the name of the subscriber, follower. Sorry, I get subscriber and follower mixed up because this was originally my subscriber one. The only other thing we've changed then after that, or the next thing we've changed, is we've removed the total or the follower command here, the follower function, So the follower function's gone. That is now inside this follower.js file. And we've changed the parameters we're calling it. Now previously we was calling it with just event data, but we don't really need all of that, so why pass all of that data through? We only want the name in this case. Now if this was a subscriber, you may want to have in there the name of the subscriber, the number of months, the tier 1, 2, 3 or 5, that kind of information. So if this was a subscriber, you might have more parameters pass through, or you may decide to pass the event data and extract those parameters inside the function. So that's the change. The actual name is stayed the same, so the function name is the same as before, it's just we've changed the parameter. Finally on this, I've added in this little bit of code down here, which is just to test it. So when you very first open this file in OBS, it will trigger the alert, so we can actually test it without having to go to Streamlabs and hit the alert buttons to send a new follower. And all this does is it calls the follower command with a name, in this case the name's testing, and we just, for completeness, we send it a subscriber count as well. Both of these are normally what would be called here from the API. So that's the changes in this file. These, as usual, will be available on my Discord. I'm updating Steam at the moment, so that's the Twitch overlay. So if we now go and look at the other two files, we've got the follower and the follower.js and the style.css. So we're going to quickly run through these. I'm not going to go into too much detail. You can pretty much Google any of this and it will explain how it works if you don't understand it, but it would make the video too long. First thing we do is grab the alert header and set the value of it. Now these codes have been sort of ripped out of some of my other codes, so there may be a few little bits in here, like I don't even know if we need span in there, I can't remember. The next one, image left, alert image left, that's the image, the rotating bit icon. We simply load this follow image.gif, which is, have I got this available? Well, so is this follow image gif, which is just an animated gif of an icon. You'll also see in here we got murloc.mp3, which is the one that's going to be called when we want to play the sound. The next thing we do is we grab the alert context and set the name to what we've passed in here. Quite simple. We're just setting up what text is in those fields. We still can't currently see it because the width of this whole alert box is currently set to 0 in the CSS. So I'll come to the animation on how it will appear in a second. Now to load the sound, we just load a new audio. Once again, that's the file in the disk. We don't need a path because it's in the same directory. Excuse me. We don't want to loop it, we want it to play once, we want to set a volume, and then we want to load it into memory. Now there's a little thing here that we use is set timeout again. Now the reason we do set timeout here is when you're working in JavaScript and loading stuff in at runtime, sometimes that loading process can take a while, and because this is asynchronous, i.e. it will run this and then carry on with this whilst this is still loading. Like it might still be loading into memory, that murloc.mp3, when we get to down here. So what we do is we do a simple set timeout, and all this does is we declare a temporary function here and say do all of this code, but don't do it for 100 milliseconds. By the time we get to 100 milliseconds, the rest of this code will be finished. Once this is finished, it should have loaded all the stuff on screen. So the only reason we're doing the set timeout is to avoid the case where we're trying to set something on screen that hasn't been currently loaded. Now there's a note here. This note is to do with, to remind you that there's a problem with current browsers where if you try and play a sound, it won't allow you to automatically play a sound unless the user interacts with the screen, the page. So this is to stop all these spam sites where you turn up and there'll be video and sound and just all start playing immediately get there. This won't allow it. This is just this change is to stop these spam sites being able to do it. So now you have to click buttons normally, which when you think about it, we don't want to have to interact with this. In fact, you can't when you're streaming. Luckily, OBS doesn't have this restriction in it. But I have put a note in here anyway. You will get an error saying the user hasn't interacted with the page if you try and run this particular code in a normal browser window. So that's why we'll be using the OBS debugging setup that I described in the previous video. So anyway, 100 milliseconds after this function's finished, this whole function's finished, everything should be loaded. So then we can play the audio. We set a little callback here, which all this line does is it says when the audio finishes playing, remove it. Just a bit of memory, like hard-coded garbage collection, if you like. So we then go and get the alert container. This is the surrounding div that contains all of our animation. And what we want to do here is we want to trigger the animation to start. Now this animation will get run through when you very first start the page. It's just the way HTML works. But we won't see it because it's hidden at that time. So what we want to do now is restart the animation. Now there's no restart function, if you like. You can't, as far as I'm aware, get the element and then say start the animation from scratch. So what we have to do is we have to be a bit sneaky here. The first thing we do is remove the class, which is this AB class here, alert box class. This is the one that contains the animation. So we need to remove it. We then have this setting. This is a weird one. This basically is effectively just doing nothing with it, but by doing this, the code itself says, you've changed something in this, even though we've not actually changed anything, we've just accessed it. It's a bit weird why we have to do that, but we apparently have to. We then re-add the class with the animation in, and at this point when we re-add it, it will start to animate. Now we still can't see it because we've got it set to display none, which is effectively display hidden. So we then, this is the bit that makes it visible on screen. So this bit, this line restarts the animation. This line will make it allow you to see that animation. So that's all we do there. So 0.1 of a second, 100 milliseconds after we've called this function with an alert, the alert will start playing. We then have a little, that should be 0. None. We then have a little thing down here. Now this for this particular animation isn't really that important because the animated box sort of, as you saw, expands out and then collapses back at the end. So it effectively hides itself at the end anyway. So we could get away without having this particular one in. All this is doing is setting the display to none. So if you have an animation where it doesn't sort of hide itself at the end of the animation, you would need to hide it via something like this, where you put in the length of the animation. And that's pretty much it and that's pretty much all the function is that we call in for the animation. So we set the data, we load the audio, we then have a delay, we spark off a different thread which runs 100 milliseconds later to say play the audio, and then this bit does the restart of the animation that's in the CSS. So that's all this one does. Hopefully you can follow that, and anything you need to know about it, Google it. If you have problems with this, feel free to drop in stream and ask me, and I can run through it on stream. So let's get to the CSS. This is where the animation actually happens. So we have a couple of tags at the top, which I'm not even sure if we need these in. Probably not. The main one, I guess, is background color RGB A, and the A is set to 0, which means it's transparent. So on a normal web page, you'd have to have just a white background. We don't want any background, so we set the background to transparent. Now the bits that we need to look at are, first of all, these things here, the classes. So AB class I should just point out that the only difference between the CSS for an ID and the CSS for a class is when you define a class, that is expected to be the same for everywhere it's used. When you do CSS for an ID, that's expected only ever to appear once in your code. So think of IDs. If you want to define styles for an ID, you only should ever have one of these in your code. You should never have a second div with the same name in. You can have multiple divs with the same class, but not with the same name. You can put the same name in for IDs. It's just not something you should be doing. It'll get confusing. Excuse me, I've got this winter cold, but I'll try and get through it. Hopefully it doesn't spoil the audio too much. So in the class, we've got the usual. We set the width, height, and display effectively all to hidden. Anything else in here? We're positioning it 15% down the screen, 50% of the view width, minus 500 pixels. The actual overall box width is 1000. So we're saying get to the center of the screen and move us back half the width of our overall alert. Position absolute overload. I mean, most of these you should be able to work out. If you don't know them, they're easily Googleable, however you say that word. So the border radius 10 just gives us nice round corners. This is the bit that does the animation. So we've got an animation called animate AB alert box. It's going to run for 10 seconds, and we're going to run it once. Once again, you can look up the parameters in these. I'm not here to teach you how to do CSS animation. I'm here to show you how to use those animations in the actual overlay code. So the next one we got is the header, which is this one. The header is just going to have the text, in this case, new follower. Fairly standard stuff. You can put your specific font you want, colors and everything else in here. Nothing too out of the ordinary there. The image, pretty much the same. I guess I should just cover the sizes. The image is going to be 200 pixels wide. The overall header, which is just the strip with the new follower text in, is 60 pixels high and 1000 pixels wide. You'll see why I'm talking about this in a second when we come down to content. So now the content, we're going to have the image and the content by the side of each other. Now if we've got 1000 pixels wide and we've got 200 pixels for the image, we've only got 800 pixels left for the content. So the width here has got to be 800. The height itself needs to be same height as this. So that will automatically be I don't even think we need to put the height in, because I think it will just fit in. I mean, you'll want to play around if you're going to change these sizes with these values anyway, and that's really easy with the OBS debugger. I can show you that quickly. I don't think there's anything else in there that's too important. I mean, the break word in this case is irrelevant because usernames are always one word. And they're not that long, so you should never get to the point where the username will be longer than the width of this box. Now if you're doing a subscriber message or a donation message, you'll then need to play around with this to make sure it wraps and everything's aligned, centered, if it's a long message. So when you come to test it, do short messages, long messages, really long messages, and make sure you don't get anything weird come up on screen. You also need to protect against, when it's a user message, them putting in the normal sort of HTML characters, but that's another one later on. You can parse out all of the HTML specific code and just have text in there later. So that's the content, nothing too important there. I mean, the top is set, like how far down we want the message to start. So like I say, play around with these, get it centered, that sort of thing. The main bit is this animation. So this is the main bit we're going to be looking at for the animated code. So the next thing we need to work out is how do we want the animation to go. Now in this particular animation we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 specific keyframes. Now a keyframe is what do you want it to look like at specific points during the animation. We've got a 10-second animation, so when we get to 100% that'll be 10 seconds into the animation. 100% is the end of the animation, 0 is the start, so every 10% is 1 second because we've got a 10-second animation. So we start off, we want the width to be 0 at the start and end, which is effectively hiding it. We've got the height 60, which matches the header, you know, the new follower. We have a shadow on here, which you can look at how you do shadows. The shadow is just to sort of make the perspective look a bit better, so when it comes out it makes it look like it's hovering above your web page, so it gives you a bit more feeling of a three-dimensional object. We have a transform origin and a transform perspective. Now you go and look up these. This is just saying where we want to rotate and twist this object from, and the perspective and the rotation again is what kind of level of perspective. So if something's coming towards you, it's like how narrow. If it's like you've got a square box, it won't look like that. You'll see the sides sort of flaring in and out. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on this. You can go and look up that sort of thing. So then, say at 15% of the way through, has 100% is 10 seconds. That's 1.5 seconds. We want it now to be 100 pixels width, whereas previously we had 0. 60 pixels high. We have got a few minor changes in here, like the degrees and the actual. I think it's just degrees in this one, isn't it? Yeah. So this is just rotating it a little bit. But the main one is we want it to go from 0 pixels wide to 1000. That will give us the animation where it comes out, because the animation will say, well, I know you want it here at this point and here at this point, and it will fill in all the intermediate ones. So instead of going from 0 to immediately fully wide, it will actually animate it out for you. That's the nice smart thing this does. You just need to tell it the start and end positions. It will work out the in-between bits. And when we get to 8.5 seconds, which is when we're getting towards the end of animation, we want it at the same again. So this will animate out and then back in exactly the same sizes and everything else. So effectively we've only had to do half the animation here, and then the other half is just the same in reverse. So at 30%, so 3 seconds, we now want to be 260 high. So we've done the first bit, we've expanded the header out to 1.5 seconds. For the next 1.5 seconds to 3 seconds, we want to expand the bottom down to show the username. So then at 4 seconds, we want it to be exactly the same width and height, because we've expanded the box out, but we now want it to flatten down and lay down onto the screen, so it looks like it's come out at an angle then laid flat. Now this has a couple of little bits that are worth noticing. The first one is the shadow disappears, because obviously if you've got a flat piece of paper on a table, you won't see a shadow. It's only when you lift it up that you'll see a shadow underneath it. So when it goes flat, we don't want a shadow. It'll spoil the perspective. And we've rotated it to 0 degrees. So when we get to 4 seconds, that's when the whole thing will be laid flat on screen, and you'll just see a square box with no shadows, no perspective or anything. We then have the same at 50 seconds, and the reason that we've got these two that are making no changes whatsoever, this effectively puts a delay in. So it'll say between 4 seconds and 5 seconds, we don't want to do anything at all. We want it to lay flat, give people the time to read it before we start reversing back up. And then all we do is we go back up the stack. Now there's a slight difference in timings. So for instance, from 50% to 70%, that's 2 seconds, but from 30 to 40 is 1 second. So it will take 1 second to lay flat when it first comes out, and it will move back and tilt up slightly slower. So it comes down faster and it goes back slower, and that's pretty much it. it will then go back up to the 85% and then back up to the 100%. So you can go and have a look at how animations work. You can do some interesting stuff with animations. You can change colours, shapes, sizes. You can reload different icons and images if you wish. You can pretty much put anything in here that you can put in a normal CSS frame. I'd highly recommend going and looking at some Googling. Or Googling some animation tutorials if you haven't done tutorials or animation before. I've not done a lot of animation, so I'm learning this as well. The only other thing we've got in the CSS, that's the end of our alert. We've got this subcount tag. Now, a hash means it's an ID, and a dot means it's a class. I've just managed to. So the subcount one, because it's a hash, it goes to the ID here, and it'll say, right, for subcount, we just want to do a bit of standard formatting. This is no animations. You could animate this. You could have this such that when you get a new updated subcount, when a new subscriber subs, you could have it so there's a bit of an animation where it just scrolls out from the side or whatever, so you get a little bit of animation there. But for us, we've just got it static, so when we get a new sub, it will just update the number. There'll be no animation there at all. And all I've done with this is I've set it to a black background, white text, and I've put it at the bottom of the screen with a slight gap of 5 pixels up from the bottom and 10 pixels in from the left and whatnot. And that's pretty much it. So I will restart the animation just to show you once again what it's doing. And hopefully you can now follow it on screen. So you should see header come out, then the username drop down, then it will lay flat on the screen. Then it will pause for a second. It will then lift back off the screen. The username portion of the box will sort of animate up and disappear, and then the header will disappear as well. And you'll get the sound and the icon, animated icon. So let's just play that through again. So you can see that's our alert box. What I can do now is I will send an actual event from OBS using the OBS page where you can click on alerts and then do a test follow, and we can actually see it working through the API. So that previous one you just saw was just from this code down here, where I've just set it, when you first put it on screen it will animate. Now I'll send one from OBS, so we can see the actual name and the data coming in from OBS. Sorry, not OBS, from Streamlabs. There we go. So this time you can see the name's updated with what the Streamlabs.com alert test function has sent through, and that's pretty much it. So for extra sort of bits of information, like I said, you could load this via jQuery, so you'd have a set of these files for each, like a follower, raid, subscriber, donations, and then you could load it in dynamically at runtime. That's generally a better way to do it. If you want to put multiple of these in, if you want exactly the same animation for all of your followers, subscribers, that kind of thing, you could simply go down to here and call the same function but have a case raid, and it'll just say whoever the raider is. You may want to add in an extra bit here so that you would have the name of the raider, and instead of putting the title new follower, it would put the title raid. So you may just expand the parameters you pass into this follow command. You probably wouldn't want to call it follow command, you could just call it alert command. And here, instead of saying new follower, you would say, well, if it's a raid, write in raid. If it's a subscription, write in new subscriber. So you could use this code for all of your alerts, and just by passing in different parameters, it will change the title and the information in the box. that generally what you'll find is most people would want to have different alerts. So you may want to have different coloured alerts, different icons, different images, which you can write all in here. I would suggest you probably look for different alerts for different events, in which case you would want a different follower.js and style.js for your raids hosts, and then you can either copy and paste these down. So you'd have alert, you'd have a follower container, follower header, follower image, and then you'd have a subscriber container, subscriber, and you could do it that way if you wanted to maintain this static version. You will find that it's much easier once you start using jQuery and loading it. The second thing that you'd want to do, the one thing this doesn't have is it doesn't have a queue. So if two people followed immediately after each other within the 10-second animation, the animation wouldn't work very well, because in fact if I send two follower requests through quickly, if I can find my page, so if I send two follower requests through quickly, you will see what happens, that they will overwrite each other. So the next extension to this would be to put a queue in, so as it wouldn't process the second follower till the first follower has finished, or the second alert, should we say. So you want a queue for alerts. So if I send two through quickly, you can see the first one gets removed, and the second, and you can't really tell very well, but the first one came up, and then when the second one came in, it removed it and started all over again. Which means you would never see the first follower. Now, it depends on how busy your stream is, whether that's going to be an issue. You may say, well, if I get a lot at one time, you don't really care. I would suggest putting a queue in, and that could be a future video if it's required. And I don't know whether I mentioned this last time, but the only other thing in here that you'd want to change for a full-on overlay system is things like the sub count. Now, the sub count currently, when you first load the page, will be 0. This is because until Streamlabs API sends you the information for sub count, we don't know what the sub count is when you first load this page. So what you'd want to do with this is, when you get a alert come in saying, oh, this is something's happened, you've had a new subscriber follower, and it sends that data packet out as described before in the previous video, you would save that in a cookie or in some local data storage somehow, so that when you first load this page, you would have something equivalent to these functions here, which will go and set your subscriber count to what it was the last time the page loaded. Now, if you've had any subscribers whilst you've been offline, that will mean this wouldn't update. There are ways around that. You can trigger sort of these things to happen. Generally, it's not too bad. The first time something happens on screen, it will get the updated figures, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. But that's all we're going to do for this one. Hope that has given you a bit of a start into getting your alerts up and running. Like I say, play around with these, go on to CodePen or other sites, find free animations, look at them and say, could I use that for an alert? How could I use it for an alert? And see what you want to do. But don't forget also, now you've got this server running on your host PC, if you have the Internet of Things lights and stuff that you can control from Windows, you can actually put code into here, to do things like flash your lights, or if you've got, like I said on a previous video, one of those scrolling LED signs, you could scroll your subscribers and alert and any alerts and stuff like that across the screen. I know of one person who is actually considering getting a 3D printer style mechanism on a whiteboard with a pen, which will then write up the subscribers as they come in and donations, which would be kind of a cool thing to do. So now you've got the ability to handle the alerts on your PC. It's a lot simpler just to then call other Windows programs. You could even have donations, where when people donate and have got a specific messaging. For instance, if you're in playing Elite, you could say if someone donates over a certain amount of money and they put in self-destruct as their message, that could call the Elite Dangerous app or a set of key bindings or a macro that causes your ship to go into self-destruct mode and kills you. It's endless what you can do with this. It's only limited by your imagination. So I hope that helps. I'm going to be online on stream again in the next few weeks, if you want to, or hopefully for more than that. So if you want to come and ask any questions, feel free. Like I say, Google's your friend. Go and have a look at it. Please like and subscribe. Thumbs up and subscribe, and comment below if you'd like to see anything particular, a video on something particular. Put it below and I'll look at making a video on that particular thing. If you'd want to see more of these, please let me know in the comments below. Obviously I probably won't make any more of this unless I start seeing people wanting them. So for now, I hope you all have a great day. I'm going to call it there for this video, and I shall hopefully see you on stream sometime.